very much for coming along. This is going to be very informal, so if you're still hungry, please get up and have some more lunch. I'm going to introduce our two speakers to you in a moment, but first of all, I hope that you're finding Wellbeing Week useful and helpful. We're about halfway through now. We've got obviously the talk today and a couple more. There's the opportunity to go down to the gym and have your mini MOT. Has anyone done that? Right. Okay. So everybody else, you've got that opportunity. Who has done some colouring downstairs? Keep at it. It's looking really good now. I don't know if you've noticed, but people have been adding sort of, spiders' webs and snails and things. And some clients have been drawing in and colouring too. I'm sorry that the colouring books are spelt wrong, colour, C-O-L-O-R, but we've sorted that now. We have English over here. So I hope it's useful. I hope you're really enjoying it. Any feedback for what we might do through the course of the year, please let any of us know. Always keen to hear. So every Wellbeing Week, which is the third, we try to focus on something very specific. And this time we're going to focus on heart health. I'm pleased that lots of you are here. So what we're going to do is focus on health in general, risk factors, things that you can do to look after yourself, spot things in others, all of that good stuff. And so here we have Danny, who is Development Director at Barts Charity. Now Barts is one of our very close neighbours, just down the road. Do you all know where it is? If you've got a heart problem, straight over there. Very handy, and investing in some incredible facilities. And I spent a little bit of time being questioned about what you might do going forward. So it's really interesting, and it's really good to know that we've got that facility so close. Because unfortunately, the number of people who suffer from heart attacks and other things in central London is actually remarkably high. So having that facility close to us is good. We have also invested, which is a bright idea, in those, what are they called? Yes. Which was, I can't remember, I think it was Jan Howard's bright idea, and so we've got about 10 of those scattered around our buildings. If you don't know where they are, go look, but they're across all of our buildings here, and also now in Birmingham as well. And they do tell you what to do if you ever need to use them, so don't worry about that. So I think, who's going to go first? Dr. Mark Westwood is here to talk to you, and he's a leading clinician working at Barts, and I'm going to hand over to him, and I think he's very keen that you should ask questions as you go.
Yeah, very much so.
Super, thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce myself quickly, then I'll hand over to Danny, who'll talk just for a few minutes, and then we'll go through the sort of nuts and bolts of what I want to talk to today. So, as I said, we're going to do a little bit about me, and then we'll talk a bit about diseases of the heart, but I think we're going to focus on one disease because in the world of cardiology or hearts, there's really only one disease that sort of dominates the landscape in what we do. And then I'm going to focus on things that we can do, so what we call the risk factors for narrowing of the heart arteries, coronary artery disease, and what we can do to modify those or change them, and then I'll just try and wrap up at the end. So, a little bit about me. So I'm a consultant cardiologist down at Barts Heart Centre. I started in 2008, so I've been going, what does that make, 8 years. And my interest, so in cardiology or looking after the hearts, we all have various bits that we look after, that nobody does everything anymore. There's so much to learn and so many different things that we can do to treat and manage the heart. So I do something called CMR, which is using MRI scanners to look at the heart and assess the heart. And I do something else called PCI. Or stenting or angioplasty, they're all much of a muchness. This is putting the small metal cylinders in the heart arteries when they've become narrowed or blocked to wedge them back open and improve the blood supply to the heart. I've also got some roles locally and nationally. So I'm the Director of Education and that's sort of in charge of 1,500 people's training and education at Barts Hospital. And I'm the National Representative Society for Cardiac MRI, or how we use MRI to look at the heart. So I'm actually the treasurer at the moment. That's a bit about me. Right, I'm going to hand you over to Danny, who's going to talk for a couple of slides, and then I'll be back.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny McKirkshire. I'm one of the development managers at Barts Charity. I thought I'd take a couple of minutes just to introduce you to our new initiative, which is called Circulate. and Circulate is the Barts charity heart health network. We launched Circulate in November of this year, and the reason we launched it for two reasons. Firstly, one of the reasons is to get out and about into our local community. So as you can imagine, we're 400 metres away. Our local community is the law firms, the banks, the businesses that surround and run the City of London, and we want to get in and amongst these businesses to educate, make people aware of cardiovascular disease, which is still the biggest killer in the United Kingdom. Secondly, we launched Circulate to find businesses who would like to grow and develop a relationship with us and financially support the continued growth and innovation at Barts Heart Centre. For those of you who don't know, Barts Heart Centre is the biggest specialist cardiovascular unit in Europe, so it's a fantastic setup. It treats around 40,000 patients per year, so over the next decade we're estimating 500,000 patients, which I think is quite a staggering statistic considering the current workforce of London is around 440,000. The catchment area is gigantic as well, so the catchment area is around 6 million people, ranging from the City of London, East London, North East, into parts of Hertfordshire and West Essex as well. So what can Circulate offer you? So we've got a variety of events throughout 2016. Today's an example of a education and awareness talk led by a leading cardiovascular consultant. We could also offer a bespoke VIP tour of the Heart Centre, gives you a little bit of insight into the day-to-day functioning of a top-class unit like Barts Heart Centre. You get to see what Mark does on a day-to-day basis. Also, it's another opportunity to soak in some of the historical features of Barts. It's the oldest hospital in Europe, dating back to, I think it's 1192. We've also got some more social and fun events, I suppose. And that leads us on to our next event, which is on March the 10th at Vecchia. For those of you who don't know what Vecchia is, it's a unique restaurant space which is located just off Fleet Street, so very close to here. And what we're doing is we're running an interactive culinary experience with a chap called Mark Westwood. So the event's actually going to be led by two people, Dr. Andrew Ragg, who's a leading interventional cardiologist, so he does similar work to Mark in the sense that he would stent patients who've just suffered from heart attacks, and Matt Lovell, who is a nutritional guru. So Matt has worked successfully with the England rugby team for 5 or 6 different Six Nation campaigns. He's worked with Premiership football clubs such as Tottenham, Manchester City, and of late he's working with Commonwealth Games athletes and Olympic athletes, and much more focused on sports which have weight classes, so boxing, judo, taekwondo, more in the combat sports side of things. So once these two do short presentation, there'll be an interactive cookery experience. So our guests are invited to work with the Michelin star chefs that Vecchia have kindly volunteered, and you get a chance to cook a healthy, nutritious meal. You get to take away some food to have for lunch, and you'll also be given some menus to try out on your friends and family. The event is, I think it's quite apparent in January, we're inundated with information about healthy living, and we don't know how accurate some of the information is. These two guys leading this event are both experts in their field, so I think it'd be really worthwhile for some of you to come along. The event is completely free, it's complimentary, and it'll be done on a first come, first served basis, and we imagine it to be extremely popular. If you want to find out a little bit more about the charity or Circulate in particular, we've got our website at the bottom there. Alternatively, please drop me an email. I'm willing to answer any questions, and we'd love for you to follow us on Twitter. We're going to be posting weekly updates on health, diet, exercise, daily updates on health, exercise, what have you, on Twitter, and we're going to be having a much bigger presence on the likes of YouTube and LinkedIn. So I'll hand over to Mark, who's the expert, and let him carry on.
Great, thank you very much, thanks for that. So, right, so really before I can go any further, we've got to do a crash course in cardiology. So what we teach people in 5 years, we're going to do in 5 minutes. Okay, just some basic principles. Why do we have a heart? What is it? Just very simply, it pumps blood around, and the function of the heart is to maintain a blood supply to your vital organs, things like your kidney, your brain, your liver, etc., etc. If you think of fluids where you push them around, okay, think of central heating systems. If you have a pump, you need something. If you've got fluid going around, you need a pump, and then you need valves and chambers. Okay, so the heart has 4 chambers. I'll show you this again in a bit so you can see it. It's got, sitting on the top, what we call atria. They are collecting chambers. So blood comes back from the organs into the collecting chambers. It then drops down into the 2 pumping chambers, which are called ventricles, and then it gets pumped. It's governed by electricity, okay? How the heart beats, how it continues to beat of its own accord, it's governed by electrical impulses. Now, as you can imagine, if something's pumping hard all the while, that uses a lot of energy, okay? So the heart needs to have has its own blood supply, but it needs to maintain it, and it needs it all the time. It can't do without oxygen, nutrients for very long, otherwise it gets into trouble because it's constantly pumping. So, what common disease happens when the heart loses its blood supply? Go on. Heart attacks? Yeah. Right, so this is just the flow of blood around the heart. Just a pointer work. Yeah. So I've done the schematic here. So I'll show you what it really looks like. But we start with, does it show? I was showing a second ago. No. Okay, doesn't show on the screen. But we've got something called the right atrium. So one of the 2 collecting chambers. Then we go into the right side of the heart, the pumping chamber. Then the blood goes into the lungs, gets rid of the carbon dioxide, gets all its oxygen, all the rest of it. Then it will go into the left side of the heart. Okay, the left ventricle, that's really important. That is the main pumping chamber of your heart. Okay, and the blood comes out the left ventricle into something called the aorta, which is the main artery that comes up here and then turns on itself and goes down. And that's going to supply everything in your body with oxygen, blood, nutrients. Okay, then goes into the veins, and then we go around the cycle again. Okay, that's what it looks like in real life. Okay, so just so that looks a bit more like a heart, but that's what it looks like. So 4 valves, 4 chambers. Right side of the heart, pump the blood to the lungs to get oxygen and nutrients. Left side, then take that blood that's got all the oxygen and nutrients and push it around your body. Okay. The arteries that supply the heart are called the coronary arteries, and they can get narrowed over time. And that process is called atherosclerosis or atheroma. If they gradually get narrowed over time, that leads to angina. So that would be, I go for a walk, after 5 minutes I feel this funny discomfort on the left side of my chest. It's a dull ache, it might go down my arm, and then I stop and it goes away. Okay? And then I walk again, and 5 minutes later I get exactly the same thing. And the reason for that is when you exercise, your heart pumps faster and harder, it needs more blood and oxygen, and because the artery is narrow, the supply can't keep up anymore. Okay? You can't get enough blood down the arteries. That's a sort of slow, chronic, progressive thing. Then there's this other thing called infarction, or what commonly is called heart attacks, and that's where you get a clot forming within the artery of the heart. The blood supply stops suddenly, and you get a heart attack. So this is what your arteries look like, and this is what's happening. So on the top left, A, we've got a normal artery. So you can see on the inside surface, nice and smooth, okay? Then number B, right. Is there anybody under the age of 30 in here? Okay, good for you, because you're A. So the people under 30 are A. I'm afraid the rest of us, by the time we get to 30, we're already at B. So we've all got a bit of this. So we've just got this atheroma process, the cholesterol, fat, the changes, just a little bit, okay? I'm afraid we've all got it, okay? It's just what happens in Western life, okay? Unless we want to kind of go and live in the Brazilian rainforest and cut ourselves off from society and go back to hunter-gatherers, it's inevitable. As you get older, more and more of this atheroma process builds up, and you can see the artery just physically gets narrowed. That gives you angina. What can sometimes happen is the inside surface of this splits, okay? That's called a fissure. That's just the technical name for it. Now just think about if I got a knife and cut my skin, okay? What would happen? I'd get blood pouring out, and then I'd get a clot, yeah? The process is no different. So if this inside surface splits, you get a clot, which normally clots are quite good because they stop you bleeding, but they're really not very good in your heart arteries because they block off the blood supply, Okay, so that's what happens in a heart attack is D. So angina is chest pain due to what we call ischemia, or a lack of oxygen and blood supply to the heart, and it tends to be, although not always, related to effort, as I've described. And a heart attack, well, you've got no blood supply to that bit of the heart, full stop, and so you're going to get discomfort or pain when you're not doing anything at rest. Okay? Angina does not lead to death of heart muscle, but a heart attack does lead to death of heart muscle. If the heart muscle cells don't have oxygen and blood supply for long enough, they just die. And we've got a slight other problem, and that is some tissues in our body can regenerate, they can rebuild themselves. So if I theoretically chopped out 90% of my liver, it would all grow back. Okay, the liver has an amazing regenerative capacity. Heart cells don't do it. Bit of a design fault, but I'm afraid that's what we're stuck with. So angina is reversible. Once you get to heart attacks, I'm afraid it's irreversible. So infarction or heart attack is the death of heart muscle due to a lack of blood supply, and even in 2010, so relatively recent data, still the commonest cause of death in the United Kingdom. 80,000 deaths per year, 1 in 5 of all male and 1 in 10 of all female deaths. And it's still not a good thing to have, is it? Despite all these fancy treatments we've got. After 30 days, 10% of men have perished, and 15% of women. Still not great. Okay? So, probably better not to have one? I think so. Okay. Oh, there we go. Right. So, prevention is better than cure. All right? Because once the heart cells are dead, there is no cure. It's just what we can do to save more heart cells dying. So, that's where all these risk factors come in. So, the risk factors. So, risk factors are things that increase the speed with which that narrowing process occurs. And there's loads. Okay. Right. Socioeconomic class. So it's well known that people in the sort of higher socioeconomic classes don't have as much coronary artery disease or this narrowing process as people in social class 5. Type A personality. Well, I'm standing in a law firm in the City of London. I'm a consultant cardiologist. Welcome to the real world. We're all type A. There's not really very much we can do about it, is there? So we're just going to have to live with that one. Okay. There's behavioural things. So smoking, you all know about, your diet, physical inactivity, and alcohol. Alcohol's been in the news a lot recently. Obviously, the changes in guidelines about how much you can drink. I'm not quite sure where the evidence is, but we've decided to tighten those up. There are then some more what I've called medical risk factors, and that's your cholesterol, blood pressure, obesity, and diabetes. I've put these as more medical because you can alter them and adjust them, but you might need somebody like me to help you a little bit, because it tends to be taking medication or pills rather than just something you can physically do, like smoking, i.e. stop. If you have all of that locked together, you get this thing called metabolic syndrome, which is really, really bad news. What happens is you get that really accelerates this process of the narrowing. Okay, it's kind of a quadruple hit, if you like, of all of them. And the reason is that well, I was never very good at maths at school, but risk factors don't add up. So what happens is if you have more than one, okay, the risk or the speed of this, they basically multiply, so they're not additive. So if your risk from your cholesterol being up is 3% over and above everybody else who doesn't have a raised cholesterol, and your risk from high blood pressure is 2%, it doesn't equal 5%. Okay, they start multiplying up quite quickly. Diabetes is a really, really potent risk factor. Okay, that really seems to accelerate this narrowing process. We can work out your risk. This is an oldish score. Okay, it's called Framingham Risk Score. If you go to Google after this and type in Framingham Risk Score, there'll be 100 million calculators. They'll just all pop up, and just click on one of them. It'll ask you to put things in like your age, if you know your cholesterol, your blood pressure. It'll ask you to put in all these things, and it'll give you your risk of having a heart attack over the next 10 years. Okay. Do watch the cholesterol units. British, we always like to be different, don't we? Yeah, so we have completely different cholesterol units to anywhere else in the world, so just be mindful of that, because you might get a very funny answer otherwise. And there's modifications of this. There's JBS, so the latest is something called JBS2. It's just an enhanced version of this based on more data. It asks for slightly more information, and it's supposed to give a slightly more accurate predictive risk. So this is just to show you that I can't do maths. So a 55-year-old man who does not smoke, that blood pressure 130 over 70 millimetres of mercury is normal, with a normal cholesterol 4.1 total. Okay, their risk is about 8%. Okay. Case B, so the same age male, but we've made him a smoker now blood pressure, it's towards the higher end of normal. It's not massively elevated, and the cholesterol a little bit higher. 5.5 is mildly elevated, but not really, really high, not sort of 7 or 8. And their risk is 3 times higher. So it's just really to show you how this sort of all multiplies up very, very quickly. So, well, go on. Yes, you can.
When you talk about cholesterol,
Yes.
there's good and bad cholesterol.
Yeah.
And so when someone says your cholesterol is high,
Mm-hmm.
does your risk factor go up even if it's good cholesterol?
So your cholesterol is made of 2 components. There's, as you say, the good guy and the bad guy. The good guy is something called HDL, or high density lipoprotein, and your bad guy is LDL, or low density lipoprotein. Most calculators just want the total cholesterol. You are right that that what you can do as well is just look at the LDL component of the cholesterol, and that should be less than 3. And again, the higher than that is than 3 millimoles per litre, then your risk starts going up. And you're also correct that actually if you take your HDL, and that's high, that brings your risk down as well. All the tablets, I'll come to this, all the tablets that treat cholesterol unfortunately only lower the bad cholesterol. We don't really have anything that pushes the good cholesterol up. Okay. There was one tablet 10 years ago that got close to going on the market, but unfortunately it caused your liver to fail. So most people decided that wasn't a very good idea. So you have an HDL of 3, okay, you'd have it double normal, but your liver wouldn't work, so it's not good.
What can you do personally to try and reduce your bad cholesterol?
So bad cholesterol, so it's weight control, diet, exercise are the 3 things. And interestingly, if you do exercise, it's one of the very few things that actually slightly pushes up your good cholesterol as well.
So when you look at that calculation, you're looking at the LDL or the...
These, when I did these were done from Framingham, and they take total cholesterol. Some of the more modern ones you can put in the actual more specific profile. All it does is just refine it a little bit. But if you look at a large number of people, despite the fact that there will be differences with each individual between the percentage of low LDL, good and bad cholesterol, overall your total cholesterol does predict your risk. So.
What if, on that case B, you made the person a non-smoker, but still with those figures, what would happen?
So it will drop disproportionately. So if
Sorry
you
about your maths.
no, it's all right. It's all right. It will drop disproportionately. So probably you're taking out one, say, of the 3 risk factors we've got. It's going to drop more than a third of the way back. So you might find it's sort of 13, 14% rather than 16 or something. It's that, as I say, so they multiply up. So if you have 2, you won't go, you may only be at 13, 14%. It's when you get 3 and you're 24. If I put diabetes in, we'd be at 40%. Okay, if you stop, so that's where the potency of smoking comes in. So if you've got sort of blood pressure's a little bit up or borderline, your cholesterol's a little bit up, but if you stop smoking, you'll really make a massive difference. Right. Risk factors, what can we do? So there are some things we really can't do very much about. You can't at the moment do anything about your genetics. Okay? I'm afraid we're not. Has anybody ever seen the film Gattaca? No? So this is a film in a sort of very, very strange environment where there's sort of gene-modifying therapy in utero and all this. It's a very dystopian film, but we aren't there yet. There is nothing you can do about this, so you're stuck with what you've got. There's some you can do something about, okay? If you've got high blood pressure, we can do something about it. Diabetes, it's therapy, isn't it? It's tablets or it's injections or whatever. That lowers your risk, but you never quite get it back. So if you have high blood pressure, and we give you lots of medical therapy for that and get you back to a completely normal blood pressure, your risk will still be higher than somebody who doesn't have blood pressure. So you modify it, but it never gets you back to normal, unfortunately. And there's some you can do rather a lot about, okay? Behavioural risk factors. So smoking. So there's a 50-year, these are just sort of some studies that I pulled out really just to make the point. I mean, I'm sure some of you will be able to, if you've been reading around, would quote others. But there's a 50-year cohort study, so doctors followed up 50 years who smoke, and in 60% of them, the death in smokers was due to what we call cardiovascular mortality, i.e. something going wrong in the heart which leads to death. In some other studies, it even gets up to 80%, and in certain if you looked at certain groups of doctors, it was up to 80% as well. The actual figures don't matter. I'm just making the point that if you smoke, it's quite likely that your heart's going to going to be the reason for your demise. Okay. Now, smoking is an interesting one. So if you look at smoking rates, the big trials about smoking, so the first trials come out about lung cancer. The stuff about hearts comes out a little bit later. Okay. Smoking rates, therefore, in the 1970s start to decline, and then they kind of get stuck, which is at about 20% of adults smoke, and it's relatively stuck at that. There was a drop when we banned smoking in public places. Okay. And the other thing is that there was a study in Ireland done when Ireland banned smoking and in public places. And what they found is the first year after that, the number of heart attacks across Ireland dropped by 20%. So that's part of the reason why the smoking ban came in this country, because it's pretty good evidence actually it does do something. So that's what it said. If you smoke, it's one in two, it's going to be the reason for your demise. Okay. Right, and then you get the question about what should I smoke? Okay, pipes, chew tobacco, cigars, e-cigarettes. Most of us sort of have an intrinsic feeling this might be slightly safer, although there's some recent data that says it might actually not be as safe as we think it is, and it's certainly not risk-free. But with everything else, they're all the same. So it doesn't really matter what form of tobacco you're taking, if you like. And this is my sort of punchline I usually say to people when they've had a heart attack and they smoke, that if you want to do something, okay, stop smoking. I wouldn't advocate that you don't take any of the tablets I've just told you to take to keep your stent open and protect your heart and all the rest of it. But if you stopped smoking, you'd probably do yourself the same amount of good as if you didn't take any of them. So it's really, once you've had a heart attack, it's really powerful stuff. The other thing I sometimes say is if having had a heart attack, it's very, it's a very stressful time for anybody who has that. It can be a life-changing event, certainly a very concerning event. As I've said from all the data, I usually say, if you want your frequent flyer card, keep smoking because you will come back, and we will do this again. And as we've already said, once heart muscle's dead, it's dead. So you just compound, you're just getting more and more heart muscle dying. And then what happens is you haven't got enough heart muscle for the heart to start pumping properly. You get something called heart failure. I haven't got time to talk about that today. It's a different condition. But if your heart can't pump properly to perfuse all your vital organs, you can imagine that gives you a different set of problems. Okay, so the safe number of cigarettes to smoke, I think we all know I'm going to say 0, isn't it? It's interesting that if you look in animal studies, just one puff from a cigarette actually causes what we call spasm. So that's not the narrowing process, but your heart arteries, they've got little muscles in them, and they can get bigger or smaller. They can do this. And smoking actually makes them constrict down. So if you've got some narrowing in your heart arteries already and they constrict down further, it's not a very good thing. Okay? And it's what we call prothrombotic. That means it makes your blood more likely to clot. Okay? There's cessation clinics. They're on the NHS. They are free. Now, if you're trying to give up and you take the patches to spray all the gum, you sort of read the back and it says, don't do this, don't do that, don't take it if you've got a heart problem, this, that and the other. Right, it's dead easy. They're all safer than smoking, so don't worry about it. Okay? Diet. Okay, so...
Can I just ask, with the smoking, are you at risk if you don't smoke but your partner does?
So passive smoking. The data on there is data out there to say there is an increased risk. It's actually not that big. There's some trials that said there was absolutely colossal risk, but we really don't think that's the case. I mean, part of the reason I think that the ban in public places led to a drop in heart attacks in Ireland is the sort of, you're sitting in a smoky pub and you're not smoking, but everyone around you is, and you're by default you're going to ingest you're going to inhale some of the cigarette smoke. So I think there is, but it's not. It's not massive, no.
Don't tell your smoking partner that.
Yeah, I'm going to tell him that he is a risk to me as well.
Good for you.
He
Right.
needs to stop, he's got a heart problem already.
So, diet. So, there's several things about diet. So, I'll put it all here. If you have an overall poor diet, it leads to weight gain. A diet that's high in saturated fats affects your cholesterol. A high salt diet leads to high blood pressure. And forgetting all of these, but on top of that, if you've got a sort of diet that's all full of processed sugar, low in fruit, veg, and fibre, you get an increased risk of heart disease. And diet kind of interacts as you can see, sort of diet, it has its own effects, but then it kind of starts impinging on the other things as well. Overall, we're a lot better than we were in the 1960s with diet. Okay, the era of greasy fry-ups for breakfast has gone, but so we're eating less lard and butter, and we're doing skimmed milk. Got a problem with fibre and refined sugars as well. So refined sugar and fibre are the things that we tend to lack in our diet. Okay, so what should we do? We should have, well, it's the stuff that everybody knows, isn't it? A low salt, high fibre, well balanced diet with lots of fruit and veg. The best diets, Southern Italians, because although they have olive oil, it's an unsaturated fat, which is much better, and Japan, because they just eat raw fish all day. Unfortunately, they put soy sauce on it, and the amount of soy sauce they put on, they actually have the highest prevalence of stomach cancer in the world. And there's actually a screening program for stomach cancer only in Japan, purely based on that. But from heart disease, they don't have any. Obesity, so we've talked about being sort of overweight. So this interacts, as if you have diabetes, it's more difficult to control. Being overweight, some as you know, can lead to what we call type 2 diabetes. Bigger, higher blood pressure, bigger, higher cholesterol. So you can see how all these things start interacting. What we call central obesity, i.e. bit big around here, that is worse than just generally being a bit overweight. And 63%, or roughly 2/3 of what we call cardiovascular disease or heart attacks are related to being overweight. And we're not quite with our American cousins, but we are getting, as a nation, we're getting bigger. Okay, London, so I haven't looked at the demographics over the UK. I have a feeling, like a lot of things, London does its own little thing and it's slightly different. I think in London we are much more, people are generally a bit more conscious, and I think we're probably a lot better. I think outside of the M25, it's a slightly different story, though I don't have any evidence to back that up. Our weight has almost doubled since 1994 for the blokes, and 42% of men are overweight. Most people are surprised how little, although it's overweight, actually what that translates to in sort of how big you look. Okay, it's less than you think. And nearly a third are women, so it is a problem. Okay, there's two things that you can do to lose weight. The first is diet, and the second is exercise. Okay, now medical therapy, there are some tablets you can take. Okay, they're not very good. They only reduce your weight by 10%, and they only work while you keep taking them. The minute you stop taking them, the weight just comes straight back on. And there's not a lot of evidence that actually taking those tablets, the weight is one thing itself, but in terms of reducing the risk of problems with your heart, they actually don't seem to do anything at all. So it's kind of like, why bother? Because it's not helping you. There are these surgical procedures for more extreme measures, if you like, to force you to lose weight. They just make you eat less. You can basically, in your stomach, put bands around it, literally tie part of it up, so it fills with food very quickly because it can't expand any longer, so you feel full, and therefore you eat less. Or you can actually do what we call a gastric bypass, and that just means part of the food bypasses part of the process through which it's digested, and therefore, since it's not digested, you can't absorb all the nutrients from it. These procedures are not without risk, but they are, in extreme cases, very useful. The other thing is that diet. So what happens in dieting? So I go to Weight Watchers today, and I'm told I can't eat this, I can't eat that. I can eat 3 carrots a day. Okay, fabulous. Okay, I think so. I'm going to eat my 3 carrots a day, and I weigh myself, and then the next week my weight's gone down, and then week 2 my weight's gone down. And I think this is blooming marvellous, brilliant. Gosh, I just didn't realise I could lose it so quickly. What's everybody talking about? It's impossible to lose weight. Yeah, you haven't actually lost any weight. All that's happened is that there's a sugar store in your liver. It's called glycogen. It has a lot of water stuck to it, and you are just basically in those first couple of weeks of dieting, you're burning up the glycogen, this sugar in your liver. It doesn't have a lot of calories. It has a lot of water. So when you weigh yourself over the first 2 weeks, your weight does that. Then the real work starts, which is there. That's gone. So now you're going to start destroying the fat. You're going to burn the fat. Fat has a lot of calories. Okay, it's a lot of calories in fat. So so a very small amount goes a long way, and it doesn't weigh very much, does it? Fat's light, okay, water's heavy. So then your weight just kind of sits and doesn't do anything, and everybody gets morally depressed because they're just going, it's not working anymore, I'll just give up with this. And the reason is that if you stop eating, your body goes into starvation mode, because we were hunter-gatherers, okay, and we used to go and spear a lion, then we'd eat it, and then we might not eat for another 5 days. So our body is naturally designed that when we don't eat, to try and start conserving energy. So we have to stop it doing that, and the way to do that is to do exercise. So the combination of the two is the key. If you do a bit of exercise, because then you force your body to start burning calories. And the other thing is if you go and do some aerobic exercise first thing in the morning, that you will burn up calories faster for the rest of the day. So I went for a run this morning, I'm burning calories faster than if I had not been for a run this morning, even though that was 5 hours ago. Okay? So your burning up of calories, what we call your basal metabolic rate, stays higher for the rest of the day, or certainly for 24 hours longer. So it's a combination of the two. Okay. So we've talked about physical inactivity, and it also interacts with other risk factors. You see how it's sort of got a consistent theme. So if you exercise, your cholesterol's low, it helps your blood pressure, obviously helps being overweight. It must be aerobic exercise, okay? Making yourself look like Arnold Schwarzenegger is all very virtuous, I'm sure, but I'm afraid it doesn't reduce your cardiovascular risk. And recommended amounts of exercise. So believe it or not, it's actually, there's a lot of guidance on this. I know some people say 5 times a week, 20 minutes. Do you know what? If you go for a walk for 20 minutes, 3 times a week, you'll get about 80% of the benefit. That's all it is. Just go for a nice walk walk around in the park, 20 minutes, 3 times a week. You will get a huge amount. You get most of the benefit. The benefit is disproportionate. So you want the extra 10%, then you've got to do 30 minutes 5 times a week. And if you want the sort of entire benefit, then you're sort of, into very regular exercise down the gym and all these sort of quite intense regimens. If you go completely mad and run those things called ultra marathons, which are the 100-mile marathons, which God knows why you'd want to do it. I mean, it sounds so boring, but anyway, if you do it, actually, you get to a point where you go over the curve and your risk starts going back up again. So people who are ultra fit actually get into problems, not necessarily narrowing of the heart arteries, but other problems with their heart. This is the other thing. It doesn't matter what shape your heart is in, if you've had a heart attack or if it doesn't pump properly, whatever's wrong with your heart, doing aerobic exercise is always a good thing. It means you'll come to hospital less often, you will you will be in hospital less, you will feel better, and you will live longer. Okay? So that's just basically across the board. 30 minutes 5 times a week, as I've said, but 20 minutes 3 times a week. A few brisk walks will do a lot of the work. And aerobic exercise is basically a steady use of the major muscle groups, like your legs. Okay, they've got big muscles in them, and it's basically to get your heart rate and your blood pressure up. Okay. In terms of blood pressure, yes, when you exercise, your blood pressure goes up, but it falls and drops lower afterwards. That's how you get the benefit. And actually, as a nation, we're better at that. Now, I'm just realising I'm slightly over 30 minutes, so I think what we'll do is we'll do ethanol, and then I'll jump to the end, okay, because this has been quite topical. And this is really quite difficult to unpick. So, classically what has been taught is that, so if you have one or two units of alcohol a day, so a glass of red wine, does not lead to an increased risk of of what we call cardiovascular disease. Okay. In fact, there was some anecdotal evidence that actually 1 drink a day was actually beneficial, 2 wasn't, and then 3, your risk started going up. Once you get into the big, if you're having a bottle of wine a day kind of thing, you definitely have an increased risk of heart problems. And there is, if you drink consistently, it is less bad for you than if you go on binge drinking. So if you go have abstinence during the week and then Friday night you have blowout, that is worse for you. It's complicated, okay? Because if you look overall, for some reason in women, it seems that drinking alcohol, we're not describing the amount, but just are you a drinker, yes, no, seems to reduce, you seem to do slightly better. But 2% of cardiovascular disease is due to alcohol. So alcohol does have a lot of effects on your heart, but the narrowing of the arteries isn't really a big one. It's not as big as people think. It causes other things. Alcohol consumption with socioeconomic classes. Does anybody know how this varies? It's not straightforward. So smoking's very easy. Higher socioeconomic class, lower smoking rates. Alcohol's more complicated. So you see a sort of dip in the middle and then back at the top, socioeconomic class, we all drink more. It's just we drink posh stuff. So we drink the wine and spirits and beers lower down. There is a change in what we drink. Okay. And alcohol does a lot of other things. It can cause heart rhythm problems, something called atrial fibrillation, and something called cardiomyopathy. That is a posh term for some process not due to narrowing of the arteries or the heart that leads to the heart getting big and not pumping properly. And it causes loads of other bad effects. Liver's a good one, okay, but also very high levels over prolonged periods cause problems with your brain and all kinds of things. So 1 to 2 units is probably okay, and the guidance has been reduced, hasn't it? So it's 14 units per week for both men and women. Avoid binging. Now, the red wine thing, it may be good for you, or it may not just do anything. The data is just all over the place. And there's some feeling that we might all be healthier overall, and just some of the conflicting studies you've got are just reflecting other things within society, and as I say, how we consume alcohol and the type we consume. As I say, there is a marked disparity. So socioeconomic classes, the sort of top ones are all drinking their wine, and the lower ones don't. So it may be all reflected in that. It's difficult to tease it out. The thing that you've heard of, oh, red wine's really good for you, it's these things called polyphenols. And what they do, remember smoking, I said, causes spasm. So the arteries have got muscles, heart arteries have muscles, it contracts them. These things do the reverse, they relax them. And one of the few things that we think might increase HDL, not very much, but a little bit. Okay? So the real kind of answer is we don't really kind of know. Okay, so the last thing is diabetes and cholesterol. You can read the data there. I'm just going to whip through this. Diabetes in particular, the prevalence has increased. To control your diabetes better, exercise, keep your weight under control, and we do a much more aggressive risk factor control for everything else. Cholesterol we've talked about. Treatments, statins, so that's atorvastatin, rosuvastatin, pravastatin, that's one of the, I can't think, simvastatin. So they're the mainstay of treatment. Exercise, as well as I've said, and a diet that's low in saturated fat. About 25% of your cholesterol you're responsible for. 2/3 to 3/4 is your genetics and the way you're made up. I'm afraid you can't do much about that, not without some help from medical therapy. Cholesterol lowering therapy, or statins, are the second commonest UK prescription. Blood pressure measurements, as I say, I'll just show you this. So in terms of things that you can do, you can see weight reduction, diet, salt, exercise, reducing your alcohol. You can see that all of these lead to a drop in blood pressure. And what I'll tell you is that each one of these, if you went from not doing it to doing it fairly rigorously, is equivalent to a tablet. Okay, so you've kind of got 5 free tablets there, which most people don't realise. Okay? And yeah, once you're on blood pressure tablets, you're on for life. There are lots of different tablets for blood pressure medication in various groups. They do different things, and that's because there's a lot of ways in which the body controls blood pressure, because it's very important. It is the commonest UK prescription. And there we are, just under 40 minutes. So I hope that's been useful. We've learned a bit about me, a bit about Circulate, talked to you a little bit about diseases of the heart. So we've done a crash course in physiology. We've talked about risk factors. I've done a bit about managing risk. Sorry, I've skipped through the last bit, but as people were asking questions, I think we dealt with a lot of it. And that's about all I have to say. And if there's any final questions, I'm really happy to take them.
Caffeine?
So caffeine does two. Caffeine, the main thing about caffeine is actually it increases the risk of heart rhythm problems rather than narrowing of the heart arteries. So it's atrial fibrillation, so an irregular heart rhythm, or sometimes there's some other they're regular heart rhythms, but they're too fast, and it can promote some of those. So if anybody comes in with palpitations, which is the sensation of being aware of your heartbeat, what we do is we'll ask about alcohol and we'll ask about caffeine, and then we obviously say if you cut both of those down, it will probably make things better.
What is the issue with having those problems? Is it just a discomfort?
So they vary. Some of them some of them are more of a nuisance. Some of them need to be treated. The main one which is the commonest, which is an irregular heart rhythm, that's called atrial fibrillation. Depending on other risk factors and your age, there is a risk of stroke which increases, particularly with age, but with however many other risk factors for heart artery narrowing you have. So that's where we so you need to control the rhythm of the heart, i.e. make the rhythm leave the rhythm irregular but slow at about 80 beats per minute, or you can actually try and get somebody back into a normal heart rhythm. And the other thing is you need to give the blood thinners. So that used to be warfarin, but we've got some new drugs now. So the use of warfarin, which is rat poison, is declining. The reason being is that warfarin, you need to do a lot of blood tests. So you sort of, when you start, you need your blood monitored every single week, and then you need it monitored once a month. With the newer drugs, you just take them and forget about it. We've made life easy for you.
Juvenile diabetes, if a youngster is diagnosed
Mm-hmm.
and have for the rest of their life, even if they have a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle, will they always be at a disadvantage with their heart not
Yeah.
get worse?
So type 1, so in terms of the process, type 1 diabetes is a which is what young people get, is a completely different process. So what happens is that type 1 diabetes is basically where part of the pancreas, the bit that produces insulin, gets attacked basically by an abnormal autoimmune response, and therefore you don't produce insulin anymore. In type 2 diabetes, you still produce the insulin, but for whatever reason, so insulin basically tells cells to absorb glucose, okay? But your cells have just kind of switched off to that response. They're not listening anymore. It's like they've put, sort of noise-cancelling headphones on. So they're very different processes. The end point, though, in terms of cardiovascular risk in having diabetes, whichever type is the same, most young people who have the type 1 diabetes actually, because it's a complete lack of insulin, and you sort of measure your blood sugar and replace the insulin, most people, as long as tend to have reasonably good control, and the tightness of the control of your diabetes is actually quite key in your risk over time. So they are at a disadvantage, but as a group they quite often tend to be quite well controlled, and therefore that risk is managed. The other thing is, of course, if somebody's got diabetes, known to have diabetes, we're going to screen for all the rest. So the minute that more risk factors come in, we're going to treat them, rather than if you once we spot one risk factor, yes, we check for the rest. But somebody may say have what we call impaired glucose tolerance, or sort of starting type 2 diabetes for a while, which we haven't managed because we didn't know about it, and of course their risk will have been increased during that time. So yes, they are at a disadvantage, but I think they're usually quite a well-managed group. So as much as we can reduce that risk, I think that's a pretty key group where we really try and look after them.
We had a speaker earlier in the week who had an issue with an anxiety attack and said that it was everybody in the room basically thought he was having a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
Are there signs or things that we can do to, if somebody's having an attack, tell the difference between the two?
It's actually very hard. Even we struggle. I mean, we've got a whole pile of kit, so we can do things like do electrical tracings of the heart, called an ECG, that helps us diagnose a heart attack. We can take a history, but I mean, if somebody is complaining, of really serious pain across their chest, and it's not going for 15 to 20 minutes, and you just ask me in the middle of here, what would I do? And I say, well, the only safe thing you can do is call an ambulance, because I just can't tell, unless the person is known to have anxiety attacks and they say, I'm having an anxiety attack. The other thing as well with an anxiety attack is if a 20-year-old's having it, it's pretty unlikely they're having a heart attack. It's not a disease that affects 20-year-olds, so you can use that a little bit. But the bottom line is sometimes it can be very, very difficult, and the only way we can do it is because we've got a load of other tests and stuff we can do that, even when we're outside of a hospital environment, we don't have that ability.
If you have low blood pressure, how
Yeah.
does that affect your chance of getting a heart attack?
So low blood pressure is never a problem. Low blood pressure is only a problem if you get symptoms from it being so low, and that's dizziness. You quite often find that people in their sort of mid to late teens, after their growth spurts, get low blood pressure. The classic sort of teenager syndrome is, teenagers are just slobs on it, they don't do anything, lying in front of the TV for hours, okay, and then they suddenly jump up and they go all dizzy and nearly fall over. Okay, I used to get it as a teenager, and it's quite common. That kind of goes away with age. The thing is, if you start with a lower blood pressure, okay, as we get older, again, go back to my sort of Aboriginal isolated community. So if you look at a very primitive community, a sort of very basic hunter-gatherer community out in sort of Africa or in the Amazon, their blood pressure goes up till about 20 and then just flatlines and stays at about 120/80, 125/80. The Western world, everybody's just goes up. Probably a combination of lifestyle, social behaviour and all the rest of it. Nobody actually quite knows what it is, so it's a bit nebulous. Now, obviously, if you start lower down, you've got further to go, so it's probably a good thing. Anything else? Oh, one more.
You were saying about less butter. Would you suggest eating less butter and eating things like margarine, or would be better?
Marjorine's come in for a bit of stick recently, actually. So the funny thing about margarine is it's got very, very trace amounts of aluminium in it, because the catalyst that they use to make the margarine, the oils go solid, it's got aluminium in. They obviously try and extract most of that, but it's like decaffeinated coffee, okay? So they put solvent in the coffee, it pulls the caffeine out, and then they extract the solvent, but you'll never kind of get rid of absolutely every last drop of it.
So
in response to that, which is better, caffeine or decaf?
Which is better, caffeine or decaf? Well, I drink caffeinated coffee. I mean, I think what I would say is this: is if somebody's come to me to see me with palpitations, feeling the sensation of their heart, or we've got a problem with heart rhythm, then decaf's better, because we know caffeine affects a particular receptor in your heart. That's why it increases the risk of that. If not, I mean, my general advice about this, is it margarine versus butter, it's like it's a healthy balanced diet, and everything in moderation, I think, is so we sort of go around. Otherwise we just go around and round. 1 week margarine's better, the next week it's butter, then it's this butter, that butter. Even I don't keep up with it. I think a well balanced healthy diet is about as good as you can get. I mean, don't forget, we're going away at the moment, aren't we? We kind of had lard and fat is the enemy, and now it's all sugar's the enemy. So we sort of, it goes through phases, as I think we just learn more generally about the body. But people who eat health, the two best diets, the Japanese and the Southern Italian diet, are proper, well-balanced diets. That's why they are the best diets, and that's why they have the least amount of cardiovascular disease.
I'm curious to know whether you feel very frustrated doing the job that you do, seeing people coming into the Barts Heart Centre every day with conditions which arguably are preventable, and how do you manage that frustration and continue to feel motivated to do your job?
What a great question. Okay, I take a sort of very broad approach to that, and that is, I'm on a very simple level. I think I'm there to try and help people, educate people, and inform people. So I can tell you the facts, what I believe to be the facts. I can tell you what I think is best for you. I hope that I can impart some of that information to you, as to my patients. They might do something about it. But I'm not the nanny state. I'm not there to tell people how to live their lives. And as long as you're informed, then you can make that choice. I just like to go away and think that out of clinic, well, I might have talked to about 3 people about their cholesterol, and if one of them's going to go away and do some exercise or something, job done, and I'm very happy, because nothing in life is perfect. So I just take the view that I impart the information, I try and educate, and I just hope that some of it rubs off, and I think that's the best way to be.
Do you see a lot of repeat offenders?
It's people coming back with second. Yeah, because once you've had a heart attack, that's a really big risk factor for getting another one, unfortunately. And some people, it's just completely out of their control. Again, once it's happened, it's happened. If somebody's having a heart attack in the middle of the night, my job is to stop the heart muscle dying, get the artery open, and just do my best. And you just focus on that. The rest we can sort out the next day. I have to say that sort of repeat offenders who continue to smoke get a fairly clear discussion that you really you need to give this up. You are just going to get yourself in a complete mess if you don't. And I know it's difficult and all the rest of it, but I'm not really doing my job, and I'm not being fair to people if I don't tell them that. When people are coming back for a second, if you like, having had a second heart attack, we get even more. We get much stricter. So the cholesterol tablets, we'll use the most powerful ones, and all of this. So we really try and pull people's risk down as much as we can, because if you've done it twice, you're kind of marking yourself out as somebody who could potentially have a lot of problems in the future.
My partner had a heart attack in the summer, and he's now got stents in his heart. And everything is fabulous. He's on a huge number of tablets that he has to take every morning, whatever. He's now exercising, whatever. Is his risk still much higher, even if he's doing all the right things?
So you never get as I said, if you do all the right things, just because of the virtue that he's had heart attacks, your risk is always higher than somebody that never had one, if you just look at the population, because you've kind of marked yourself out. If he, for most risk factors, even if you get them really well controlled, your risk is still higher compared to somebody who doesn't have that risk factor or those combination of risk factors. Smoking is kind of the nice one, because eventually you come back to baseline, i.e. what happens when you stop smoking is your risk stays higher, but basically you just wait for everyone else to catch up. That's the only one, but your risk, unfortunately, is always high, no matter how much we try and do stuff.
So it could just be unlucky and it could happen again?
Hopefully not, though.
Can I just ask, after you quit smoking, how long does it take your risk to come back to?
15 years. Roughly. You sit and you catch everyone up. It takes about 10 to 15 years. However, for you to completely catch up, you get a disproportionate it's not. You catch up sort of in a linear fashion over those 15 years. It's not progressive like that. You actually get you benefit the most quite early on. But what happens is you start coming down, and everybody else is catching up as they get older, and you sort of meet somewhere in the middle. But it is quite a long time.
One risk factor which you haven't mentioned is stress. What's the evidence for that being a contributing factor?
So, I mean, stress tends to get tied up in type A personality, the aggressive, go-getter, I want my deal, I've got to make £1 million by tomorrow. So that's, the sort of classic Wall Street. So that's where it's put in. It is pretty good. There is pretty good evidence if you look at the sort of type A personalities that we do have an increased risk of heart disease. It is equivalent to most of the other risk factors in terms of its potency or power. The reality is, I just say, look, there's people around here, we've all got busy jobs and lives. The reality is we're not going to change, otherwise we'd have done it. So it's kind of like, we're not all going to take up, taking 3 days off a week and meditating. It's not going to happen. So.
And arguably, lots of the risk factors interlinked. So if you do exercise, inevitably you're going to be less stressed because you're going to be at the office, or your lunchtime walk, or whatever it is.
Exactly. So they do. I mean, that's one of the things I've tried to bring along. That you start tackling one, you tend to have a lot of positive knock-on effects with all of them. And you're right. Yeah, if you exercise, people who exercise. Other benefits. You mentioned stress. Sleep is another one. So people who exercise regularly sleep better and get deeper sleep. They get what we call REM sleep, and it's a very, very key component. Don't know what. Nobody knows why. It's a very key component of your sleep cycle. So you go through 4 stages of sleep, and one of them is called REM sleep, and that's pretty key. And that's what makes you feel a million times. That's why. And people who exercise do that a lot faster and do more of it. So that's why it's thought you sleep better.
So is lack of REM sleep consistently going to cause heart problems?
I don't think anybody's looked at that. I bet you somebody has in a neurology journal. I'm not aware of that, but it's like when you drink alcohol. Okay, so I'll go out and drink 5 pints tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to feel rubbish. Part of the reason for that is that alcohol stops your REM. You don't get REM sleep, so it makes you feel pretty grotty and all the rest of it. Whether that specifically then it translates into an increase of heart disease, I honestly don't know. It may well do.
I'm going to stop there because it's 5 past. Probably have a minute or two afterwards if you have very specific questions, maybe. But both of you, thank you very much. That was really practical, thank you. Can I just remind everybody, we do have a gym downstairs with exercise. And in response to all of your feedback, we now have 3 different exercise rooms and lots of different classes. And it's not all about, boot camp and stuff like that. Some of it's dancing, all sorts of things. So if you're not a regular member, please do. And if not, I've started getting off at a different train station, walking. And so the point around that walking every day, it has made a difference actually, big difference. The other thing I could do is just close the lifts down and then we'll all have to walk up and down. So, the threaten's there. But thank you, that was really, really helpful. And it's lovely to know that you're only 400 yards down the road. We really need you